Shana Mackler.
Good evening, everyone. We are delighted to be with you and are grateful to Deb and everyone who tried to put this on in person. I know we were looking forward to being in person as well. I want to just set a little bit of the expectations for this evening. We have several questions that have been gathered from prior events that many of us have held independently or collectively as a community. And we wanted to be able to address, based on Jewish law, some of those answers for the Jewish community. So we will have some guided questions that the rabbis will answer. Each rabbi will be directed a question, and the others can contribute to the answer as well, in agreement or disagreement, as is our way. We want to make sure that we have time to get through all of them. And so we are, sort of guiding this process along. Please feel free to post a question in the chat, and provided we have time at the end of our discussion, we will get to as many of those as possible. In a moment, we will post a PDF of Jewish text resources from the Torah on forward to more modern times. It is it is comprehensive. It is not exhaustive. It doesn't cover everything that we know could be on there, but we want to make sure that you have the resources at your fingertips, as it were. So you will see the PDF appear in the chat, and you can click on it and download it to your own computers. If you want a hard copy, we will make sure that you get one after this event as well. Some of the rabbis on the panel will be mentioning those texts as they speak, and some won't. We'll have other resources to share with you. We know that there are many, many resources that we could use, as we have a wealth of tradition and a rich coffer, really, of our commentaries and understanding. Each one of us may represent a different perspective on this issue of abortion in Jewish law. But all of us are committed to Judaism, to its survival, to the application of Jewish customs and tradition to our lives, to improve not only our lives, our community, but also the world. And this is a very important conversation that we're having, and I could not be more grateful to have my colleagues joining online as well, voices from all across our community, representing each congregation. If I can invite them each to say their names and where they serve, or the community that they are representing in an institution or otherwise. Rabbi Saul? We're still muted. I'm sorry.
No, I'm going to be the whole evening muted, so I don't say the wrong thing. I am fortunate to serve Congregation Sherith Israel and involved with the Jewish day schools in town.
Thank you. Rabbi Joshua Kullock.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm Joshua Kullock, serving the West End Synagogue here in town.
Rabbi Jessica Shimberg.
Hi, you now know my name. I am an independent rabbi in Nashville, having received my smicha, my ordination, through Jewish Renewal, which is a pan-denominational rabbinical school, and also working in Jewish Reconstructionist, or now Reconstructing Judaism circles.
Rabbi Rice? Oh, you're muted too, sorry.
I'm Rabbi Laurie Rice. I'm one of the rabbis at Congregation Micah in Nashville.
Thank you. And Rabbi Tiechtel.
I'm Rabbi Yitchok Tiechtel with Chabad of Nashville. Came here 25 years ago. Hard to imagine. So 25 years have passed. It's wonderful to be here this evening.
We're grateful for all of you. I am Rabbi Shana Mackler. I'm one of the rabbis at the temple, and I will be serving as the moderator. So we have all of the voices from all of the movements represented on the panel. You should see in your chat the file that was shared. So hopefully that has come across for each of you. So tonight we'll begin at the beginning of trying to figure out where this conversation of abortion and Jewish law comes in. And we are going to take it from the perspective first of a fetus. So what is the we're going to talk about the idea of ensoulment and when life begins. And then we'll have one perspective, and we'll see if there are other denominations that have other viewpoints on this. So Rabbi Shimberg, would you explain to us the Jewish view of a fetus in early pregnancy?
Sure. And you'll see when you open the source sheet that when Rabbi Mackler posed this first question, the Jewish view of a fetus in early pregnancy, one of the things that I did in creating the source sheet for us tonight is to, just as Rashi does, to explain the Jewish view as this question of how are Jewish views informed, and how has that developed over the centuries of rabbinic Judaism, despite the fact that we are a monolithic, we are non-monolithic group of people, and we experience and practice Judaism, particularly in North America, through denominational or maybe pan-denominational lenses. However, in thinking about the question of a fetus versus a person, it's pretty clear in Jewish law that a fetus does not have personhood, certainly early in a pregnancy. There are sources that start from our biblical text. You see in the source sheet that we have from Shemot, from Exodus, a story of a man who strikes a woman, and that if this woman is pregnant and he mistakenly strikes this woman, if she loses the pregnancy, he is only liable to her husband for the loss of his wife rather than the loss of a potential life. So there is a way in which in this part of Torah, where this is the same part of Torah where we talk about an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth, and a hand for a hand, and a foot for a foot. And we see here that the fetus early in life is considered to be part of the woman, as a part of her. And so if the woman dies, the man is guilty of homicide. But if that's a termination of a pregnancy, that there's not another homicide charge for this. And we see this carried through in Sanhedrin, in the different tractates of Talmud. We see it in Mishnah Torah. I know that Rabbi Kullock I had thought that this was Rabbi Kullock's question initially, and he had given a number of sources about when somebody strikes a woman and causes her to miscarry.
So we'll let Rabbi Kullock sort of pull that thread through Jewish text. Can you talk about the ensoulment piece? When does a soul enter, according to your understanding of Jewish tradition, soul enter a fetus or enter a living being?
There is a sense in Jewish tradition that ensouling of life happens at the time when the first breath is taken. And this goes back to stories from Bereshit about the divine taking earth from different places around the earth, taking Adamah and turning it into Adam, and that it was the breathing of life into the earthling, that, or man, if that's your preference in reading scripture, it's that breathing of life from that very moment of the breath. So that we see that throughout Jewish tradition, coming back to if a head has come out of the body of the mother and taken that first breath, then that is a life. Now, does that mean that a fetus, that the moment that I knew that I was pregnant with one of my children, that I didn't automatically say, oh my gosh, my baby, like that I was very, as a Jewish woman, wasn't thinking about the fact that the first 40 days are considered to be just womb water. I was excited about this potential for life. And I think it's important, and you'll hear throughout the evening, I would expect, Rabbi Mackler, that all of us hold great esteem for life and the potential of life. It's the question of what is personhood, and what is that status legally, and how do we look at that as Jews? So in response to this question of ensoulment, my belief is, in accordance with Judaism, that the ensoulment comes with this first breath. And I'm curious to hear how my colleagues might respond to that from different denominational perspectives.
Does anyone from any of the other denominations feel that there would be another explanation, or something that has maybe evolved over time throughout the denominations? It's not a shy bunch. You're in agreement that this is sort of the standard understanding throughout all of our movements, that ensoulment would happen upon that first breath, the nishama, that breath that comes into the body.
Good evening, everybody. I don't think this is a different movement type of approach, but I think that there are enough sources that will say all sorts of different things regarding when the soul comes into the, each and every one of us. But, regardless of the approach on this specific subject, what is clear, at least to me, is that the question has not played a significant role in the halachic, the Jewish position regarding abortion, yes or no. So it's like the conversation regarding the subject of abortion in our classic sources doesn't usually take the concept of the soul as the deal breaker of what needs to be done in any specific circumstance. What may be said, what we could say is that given that there is the potential of life and there is something there, that is why Judaism will present some restrictions in what is related to the subject of abortion, because there's this potential for life that is being developed as it is growing in the mother's womb. But again, it's like given that the ball is on the subject of abortion, we different movements of different texts may have a different approach on when the soul comes, but none of that, according to my understanding at least, will play a significant role in defining what the law should be.
Right. I think that is an important point to underscore. When we hear conversations about when does life begin, that matters in secular conversation in terms of the positions that people might take. But with our Jewish conversation, the conversation regarding Jewish law, that really isn't the topic of debate necessarily. We're going to talk about some of the other pieces that come into the explanation. We celebrate life. We are told to do everything to preserve life, and so I think the conversation takes a different turn because it sort of skirts that issue of when does life begin, and that ensoulment, if that's the case for a definition. Will you then, Rabbi Kullock, take us through sort of from the text in Exodus through some more modern times? Let's peel those layers back and see how we get to an understanding in our context of what that means how Jewish law, halachically, according to Jewish law, how do we look at this procedure of termination of a pregnancy?
So I would, given that some of the answer has already been shared, what I think it's important, at least to me in this specific conversation, given how important the subject is, and just to add a bit of the complexity to the mix, when we get to analyze the Jewish take on abortion or the termination of the life, the concepts of pro-choice and pro-life do not work very well. Okay, it's I would even say that Judaism is both pro-choice and pro-life, or neither one of the two, and both at the same time. Very Jewish, by the way. And I want to try to explain why is that happening. So as Rabbi Jessica was mentioning in the book of Exodus, there is this very clear concept that somebody who is intentionally murdering somebody else has to be the punishment for that person is the capital capital punishment. So there is the death penalty for another day, Judaism death penalty for a different moment. But according to the book of Exodus, somebody who is an intentional murderer has to be killed. In that context, a few verses later, we have the specific case by which there is also an unintentional murder of a woman that is pregnant next to what's going on. If that woman is killed, then capital punishment. If there is a miscarriage, there is no capital punishment for the person who inflicted the wound upon that woman. In that very specific case, it's the only place where the Torah is speaking about, abortion, and it is like not talking about abortion, but talking about something else. We learn, and the law will establish that the fetus is not considered to be fully on the same category as a person who has been already born, and that later on will be serving as the base for the halachic conversation that will say, as we learn in the Mishnah, and then later in the Mishneh Torah, in every halachic book, that every single time that there is a risk for the life of the mother, the termination of the pregnancy can happen even all the way up until the end of the pregnancy. And what is interesting to note, because it's like here there is not even a choice. So if the mother says, no, I don't want, I want my baby to take priority, it's interesting because according to the classic Jewish law, that is not to be taken into consideration. So again, it's like Judaism is pro-life. In this case, the pro-life of the mother. It is also pro-life for the baby, because if there is no risk, and then it's opening it up, and I think that some of my colleagues will talk about this. What does it mean, risk? It's physical, it's mental, it's spiritual. Depending on the type of definition that you get, you will be more or less inclined to make room for the termination of the pregnancy to occur. But at the end of the day, Jewish law will certainly make room for the termination of the pregnancy if there are conditions that make for that step to happen.
Will you we just briefly talk about that position of the fetus as a rodef and how that plays into this conversation of life versus life, and how it's like a self-defense move in that case?
I want to make sure that nobody else is answering that question. Because
no, we're moving on to the not physical risks.
I know, but one of the ways that the Jewish law will say or will justify this position on abortion, which I don't think is the most successful one, but I will say it anyway, it's this concept of rodef. The rodef is the pursuer. According to Jewish law, if somebody is coming to kill you, you need to kill that person first. So killing in self-defense is not considered to be a murder, or to be a murder that will get you the capital punishment. And some halachic decisors, some rabbis will use this concept of the rodef as if the fetus is pursuing the mother to kill her. The reason and that is why they say that is why abortion may happen. What I don't think it's super successful about that approach is that usually the rodef requires some intentionality. And here there is not a whole, the fetus is not intentionally trying to murder his or her mother. But again, in terms of the different approaches that Jewish writers will take, yes, it has been presented as grounds for the termination of the abortion that the fetus is putting the mother at a risk, and so it will be our duty to do this in order to save the mother.
I really appreciate you saying that and speaking about the intentionality, right? The motivation of the fetus. When it's a physical attack, or when it's a physical threat, the fetus is often likened to a limb of the mother. And if it was a gangrenous limb, it would have to be amputated. And I know these are graphic terms for something that is emotional and charged. And all of these are, God forbid, situations. But that is a physical threat to the mother. So Rabbi Saul, will you talk about the non-physical threats to the mother? Still talking about health, but maybe in a different way. The words that have been used in some of the responsa from some of the rabbis are if the baby causes great woe to the mother or disgrace. What are these categories that are different beyond the physical threat, perhaps of a rodef, or some physical risk to the mother?
Sure. And do we have the capacity to share the document, share the screen to look at it together?
I can share if I'm given the permission to share. I have it up.
Okay. Let me see if I can share the screen. I'd actually like to take a look at the two specific responsa that we're dealing with. Oh, beautiful. So I think we're on towards the end of page 6. Let's see.
As you mentioned,
thank you. Right there. Right there. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda ibn Ayash of Algiers. So we're North Africa, mid 18th century. And we're going to read it in a sec. The first thing I want to point out is that a lot of it's missing. This is sort of a chop job. And it's not always, it's not as disingenuous to just chop up responsa and pick out what's going to help us out. But let's just go through it. So he writes, I was asked and searched by heart, intellect to examine, explore what I heard about a small group of women who became pregnant and do not want to give birth again and who do not want to remain pregnant anymore. They've already conceived. Some of these women, if they become pregnant while nursing and they suspect that ayin hara, and that's the word we're going to talk about, evil eye, or danger of the new birth to the living child, and they make a medication, drugs that are known to them to terminate a child, and he'll become a nefel, a non-viable fetus, an indirect sort of abortion. Here in the case of the women of this tshuva, there is suspicion about the pregnancy's potential for harm. Behold, we have before us exactly what everyone acknowledges is an acceptable situation where an abortion be permitted to illustrate the danger to the living child, and the mother is permitted to drink an abortive drug. So it seems, according to my understanding of these issues. Let me just state the obvious that I'm not an expert in this topic. I've never been pregnant, never had an abortion. I'm one step removed. This is a rabbi who was asked to comment or his opinion on a group of women in a community who had already made a certain decision. So I want to say a couple of things about this. When we talk about ayin hara, if maybe your bubby said kana hara, evil eye, we're referring to all the non-rational thoughts, worries, concerns, the non-logical, non-pragmatic, metaphysical aspects of life. It's the feeling in your kishkas. It's the imagination of the mind, the surreal. And I think what's going on here is that the ayin hara here is a conflict of interest. It's your body, right? So you're breastfeeding, you're nurturing one child, and you become pregnant, and your body isn't sure. Like, everyone has limited resources, so the mother doesn't know how to direct her body, whether that's her prerogative or her ability or not. Do I nurture the child who's already in the world, or do I use my limited resources to nurture the unborn child, the fetus, what have you? And I think that the ayin hara is the challenge the mother has of what to do, who to support, so to speak, because it's very hard to do both. So in the end, he basically says it's kosher, they're okay. There's a few things that are outstanding I want to point out. Number one, he's a dat yachid. He's one of very few rabbis who writes like this. That's why this is interesting to us. Number two, he's asked a question after the fact has already occurred. So I don't know whether rabbis like when people, for me, people come to me and ask questions for either values clarification or values exploration. Somebody says, I'm so involved in a particular challenge, problem I'm having, I don't think I can think clearly. I want a thought partner. And that's what a rabbi can do sometimes. These women already made the choice. And if the rabbi said what they did was wrong, they're basically lost to each other. The connection is severed. So I want to point that out as well.
Can I push back a little bit on that?
Yeah.
And I also have a point.
Okay, so let me if you will, thank you. One of the things that I read into this, and perhaps it's because of the biological difference among us. When someone is pregnant and or someone is nursing and becomes pregnant, it can be a danger to the child that is existing, because it could cause the milk to dry up. Most of the time, our bodies would prevent us. It's a natural thing that happens from getting pregnant if you are breastfeeding. It's not entirely a Baba miser. I can vouch for that, as my kids are very close together in age. But I will say that is a risk when we don't have formula in this time and day. You may not have a wet nurse. You may not be able to help your baby who is existing thrive. And so if we read it as a danger, not necessarily about her not wanting another child, but perhaps as a threat to her that baby, the fetus would become a threat to her baby that's existing.
But I don't see either points of what you're making. In other words, I don't think she's saying whether she wants a child or not. The question I was asked, what does ayin hara mean? And ayin hara is not it says ayin hara or danger of the new birth to the living child. So that falls in the category of danger, which, like you pointed out, is probably true in certain cases. And I'm trying to explain what ayin hara is, and let me push you back on this, and that is to say, anyone in this room who has more than one child, you're always going to feel, I think, when the second child comes around, that there's a competition for resources. And that child, maybe they're beyond breastfeeding, maybe they're 5 years old. And when you have that second child, unless you totally got everything under control, you're going to feel like, hey, my resources there's certain competition. And so I think the fundamental challenge to his tshuva with the ayin hara point is that ein ledavar sof, meaning anybody can make that argument any amount of time, and it's a good argument. It's a really good argument. And I might be married to somebody who possibly said, how can we handle one more child? That may have happened, and it may have happened after more than one child was born. So for me, that's the fundamental challenge with his tshuva. Mm-hmm. The last thing I want to say, which I love, is that it's very empowering to women.
Yeah.
He basically gave women were the ones, the mothers were the ones who made this decision. And that may not be traditional. It might be traditional. I don't know. I just want to point that out because in terms of the liturgy we're looking at, in terms of the responsa, that's unusual. And I think that makes it interesting.
So if moving back to sort of the mental health justifications for terminating a pregnancy, where do you see any latitude given for a non-physical threat to a woman whether it's the prior text right above that, Rabbi Emden, sort of looking at this woe or great pain that isn't a physical pain.
Okay. Can we take 3 minutes look at the next text? I think that'll really show us
that's
how
great.
far.
Shana, Rabbi Mackler, before we do that, one of the things that I think is really interesting here, and for folks when you look, I think it's important for the community to understand, when you look at these texts, you'll see mostly Orthodox tshuvot. We didn't really, I don't think we added anything from the movements, at least from the Reform and the Conservative movement, who make broad responsa and build law that way in the modern age. And I think I wanted to just emphasize Rabbi Saul's point, because it's one of the things that I've come to really appreciate about Orthodox tshuvot, is that the person who is poskening, the person who is making the decision, the rabbi who is issuing this decision, is starting with a very, very narrow shela, a question that's really specific to the people involved. And therefore, as my Rabbi taught me, and he was an Orthodox rabbi to the nth degree, even he would say, you start with the outcome that you'd like to have for the person who is sitting before you. And, and Rabbi Saul was talking about relationship, that's also important. And you start with that, and then you posken backwards, and you work to find a fit between the outcome that will best, most compassionately, and with an eye toward the structure of halakha in the community will fit. And our movements that others might be more familiar with have broad response, of kind of like the American legal system, where it doesn't speak to a specific person, but it speaks more in general, like what we're going to be dealing with now in Tennessee.
Thank you. So to turn back, I appreciate that. To turn back to the text here, well, you wanted to go below and not above, so I permit you to take it in the direction you want to go.
Thanks. It's the top of page 7. Rabbi Ben Sion Chai Uziel, a Sephardi posek who had all kinds of really important responsa that are even studied today. It's clear that abortion is not permitted without reason. And I think that's another way of saying that abortion, it's sort of like, it's not okay unless it's okay. It's like, according to the Torah, can you eat pork? Well, if that's all you can eat, you're going to die otherwise. Of course you can eat pork. And that underscores what Rabbi Joshua was saying, is like, we're not extremists, and this is sophisticated and complicated and sensitive and reactive. The word that would be destructive and frustrative of the possibility of life. But for a reason, even if it's a slim reason, such as to prevent disgrace, then we have precedent authority to permit it. So what's the disgrace he's talking about? And he's talking about a case in the Gemara where a pregnant woman gets the death penalty. And the question is, should she wait to carry the baby to full term, and then they can stone her, whatever they can do, strangulate her, all that fun stuff, or should they abort the fetus? And the disgrace that he's talking about is the disgrace of the woman living to carry the baby to term. Again, this is something I will never be able to relate to directly, and it comes up in the Gemara with male sages. Like, fine, let's own that. But the specific case is, the disgrace of the woman is that she's due to be stoned. This kind of stone, not the new kind of stone. She's due to be stoned, and the disgrace would be having her live the pain of waiting for the anticipation of the death penalty being carried out upon her. And so even if it's a slim reason, such as to prevent disgrace, we have precedent authority to permit it. Permit what? Permit abortion. Permit abortion because of the anguish that this woman who's about to receive the death penalty, but it's being delayed because she's pregnant, would otherwise have to entail. And so, Rabbi Mackler, I think that is a segue into some of the psychological permissiveness regarding abortion. And I want to use my last 30 seconds to say that we have a lot of loud voices both ways. There's a great piece in Hadassah magazine that where the author wrote basically that, Jews aren't my body, my choice, because the Torah restricts how we treat our bodies. It uplifts, and we're also not. We don't say that abortion's murder. There was only one rabbi, Moshe Feinstein, who was maybe the heavyweight of the generation, but he was only one voice, and it was spoken at a very political time, but it's somewhere in the middle. And abortion may be prohibited, but it's also permitted in certain cases, and maybe that's our segue into the non-physical threats, but other kinds of threats as well.
So when we talk about that, in many cases, I know each of us I shouldn't say I know, I assume each of us has had conversations with families about these devastating decisions that have to be made, the choices that have to be made. Usually there's a de facto pregnancy and something is wrong. And families will come to us in many cases to either have that guidance or governance as to what they should do or how they should respond. And it is an overwhelming time in so many ways, to deal with a devastating diagnosis or the threat that might be there, or if someone has to postpone chemotherapy to carry a baby to term, what do you do in those cases? There are innumerable cases that have come to rabbis before. So as we're talking about, the non-physical threat to the mother, we also want to make sure that in many cases, not every case, but in many cases, these are also family decisions. And oftentimes they will bring in the guidance and the wisdom of our tradition to help them make a decision. So Rabbi Rice, will you guide us through your understanding of your role in someone's decision-making process and how you bring Jewish law and tradition into that with you?
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Rabbi Mackler. So I'm going to piggyback off of some of the texts that Rabbi Saul just shared with us and had us look at as a way of kind of getting into this particular angle. Judaism is a living tradition, meaning, and we all probably know that and experience that these texts don't really mean much just as words on paper. They're meant to be sort of lived out and experienced. And it's our particular encounters in life and the experiences we have that help us to understand how these texts are to be applied. So let me give an example of what I mean by that. So the text that Rabbi Saul just had us look at about the disgrace, preventing disgrace. When I read this text, I think, and I love the angle that you illuminated for me, Rabbi Saul, but when I first read it, I thought about not the woman that she, will have to wait that much longer, however many months until her delivery time to then have her sentence carried out, and how painful that would be, the waiting, which indeed would be. But I thought about this woman is going to give birth and be so attached to a new life and then be killed, and to know that whole time that she will not be able to mother that child, regardless of the crime that she has committed that allows, warrants a death sentence, that is the disgrace. Like, how could we do that? To know, for anybody who's a parent, I don't care if it's, mother or father, that what pain that would be. I mean, somebody who is a parent who is about to leave this world, oftentimes their biggest anguish or worry is, will their children that they leave, regardless of their age, be okay when they're no longer here? So, and I read that text that way because our first pregnancy at 20 weeks, we realized we had a fatal fetal abnormality, that the problem with our fetus was going to be such that there was a strong, almost practically no likelihood that child would be born as a living, vital, vibrant baby. And but I would never have read this text that way, except I knew that once we had that information, Rabbi Flip and I, that I wanted to try again. I wanted to be a mother so badly that if I had been told that abortion was not an option for me in that moment, then the months I would have had to wait, which was practically an entire, half a pregnancy, to try again and be a mother would have been, in the words of this text, the disgrace for me, to have me go through that pain. So I read this text through kind of a different set of eyes, given the experience I've had as a Jewish woman. But I want to go back to the question you asked, Rabbi Mackler, which is, what is our role as rabbis in working with people who seek our pastoral care? And I think that's the key phrase here, is pastoral care, because I think regardless of the decision at hand, whether it's about abortion, and I think Dr. Lipsitz, Nancy Lipsitz, is on this Zoom, and I was grateful to learn from her last week as she spoke about the trigger law that goes into effect here in Tennessee on August 25th, that any kind of miscarriage, regardless of where it is in the term of pregnancy, whether it's 1 week in or 3 months in, is considered an abortion. And think about women who, whether they're that or you yourself, or women on this Zoom, who have suffered a miscarriage at any stage of their pregnancy. It is a grievous, really heart-wrenching experience from the moment, if you want to have that child, it is incredibly heart-wrenching. So the idea that now your misfortune is stigmatized even further as being an abortion, which is politically and socially tinged with all sorts of negative connotations, that is that much harder. So regardless of the decision at hand, whether it's about someone comes to us because they've miscarried, or they're contemplating this decision around abortion, or it's an end of life care issue to continue life support or not. I mean, it could be any issue. Our role as rabbis, as I see it, is to care. That's the care part of pastoral care, and to really comfort and affirm the humanity and dignity of the person who is coming to us. With abortion specifically, there is just a palpable level of distress involved. To my knowledge, no woman wants an abortion, period. In almost every case I can think of, abortion is only considered because it seems like the best of really bad options. And I can tell you that was the case for me. And, it was so interesting because in our situation, we ended up having a miscarriage on about 10 hours before we were scheduled to have a third trimester abortion. But I wouldn't say grateful, but I try to appreciate what I've learned from the experience we went through in having to make this kind of decision, and to understand why we were making the decision that we were. Because again, going back to the text that Rabbi Saul first referenced from Rabbi Yehuda of Algiers, this idea of the kishkas, the ayin hara, I call it the kol demama daka, right? That still small voice. It's that piece inside of us that is our intuition, our spiritual gut, that tells us this is a decision we need to make for ourselves. And I think rabbinically, as pastoral caregivers, that is our role to affirm that. Now, to be honest, when I was making this really difficult decision, and I was obviously making it in tandem with my life partner, Rabbi Flip, I didn't have a struggle theologically, meaning I was not uncertain as to my moral character or Jewish legitimacy hanging in the balance based on the decision that we made. But I also respect that some women may find themselves in an insecure place and be consoled by knowing that their rabbi or their Jewish tradition validates their choice, whatever it may be. And so I think, again, coming back to the original question you asked, Rabbi Mackler, I think our role rabbinically is to validate that choice and to let them know. And Rabbi Saul, you said this maybe first and foremost, and I know this is like your thread. It's your mantra in the 16 years I've known you. There they need to know that the community supports them and does not distance themselves from them. Our role as pastoral guides and as rabbis and as teachers and as community builders is to bring people in and not to push them away. And I think that has to guide us in how we counsel and work with people making this really difficult decision.
I appreciate both your personal story and sharing with us how that informs how you care for others. I know that you spoke beautifully on behalf of women being able to make those painful choices with their physicians and their family and their faith. And so I appreciate you doing that on behalf of all of us, but also for sharing with us how that informs your decision. I know there will be more conversations about, in this series that we can address more specifically what's going on today and the medical side of all of this. From our perspective, we're looking really at how does Judaism respond to this devastating decision that people have to make, or like you said, the best of worst choices. So, Rabbi Tiechtel, I know that this is something that you have also had experience with. Will you share with us your position and how you have used Jewish law to guide and perhaps to comfort families that are going through something similar to this?
Sure. Thank you, Shana. Firstly, I think it's pretty unique that we're all on here together as one, and glad to be part of this. We have plans, and Hashem has different plans, because really, I think a topic like this needs to be discussed in person. Yet in life, we have to go along with what it is, and this is how it must have meant to be from some heavenly realm. So I was thinking a bit of a different approach, not to focus specifically on the verses regarding. There's so many verses in the oral law and in the written law that allude to various perspectives on this matter. And for each verse, you can learn one way. There's a verse that we can find just the opposite. And as we always say, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, these are all words of the living God. So I want to focus for a moment on the role of a Jew in his or her relationship with God and how it affects the decisions they make. I want to thank Rabbi Laurie for sharing that personal story, because I think it makes it so much more coming more to life. And us as rabbis, as Rabbi Saul says, we never gave birth yet, but us as rabbis hear people who come talk to us and share with us their heart-wrenching stories, and we are there for them. I think what you said, Rabbi Laurie, is the number one thing is warmth and caring, because that's really, really what I feel our role is. So in life, there are going to be many different decisions we're going to have to make. And sometimes it's very difficult and we may seek guidance from others. Sometimes it could be a doctor, sometimes a lawyer, sometimes people call upon us, a rabbi, especially in a moment of a challenge. So when a woman is pregnant and she's carrying her fetus, she's really the master of the baby, because whatever she eats, whatever she drinks, the lifestyle she lives affects the baby. Now, she may be asking her, she's the master with God, but she's carrying that baby. So she may be asking herself, okay, I'm pregnant. She's young. She didn't plan this. So should I carry this baby to full term? So what does she do? She goes, hopefully, she seeks guidance. And in addition to her doctor or her parents, she may say, okay, what does Judaism say about this? And the truth is, the question about abortion is perhaps one of those sensitive, charged topics in 22 in the political sphere, which affects so many different things. And generally, as often the case in many different areas, Judaism is quite nuanced and doesn't necessarily fit into the square to say, yes, generally, you could have an abortion and you can't have an abortion. This is a very sensitive and nuanced area. And I think if a person has that question, they need to approach qualified rabbi together with medical experts to help them make this decision. And there are various questions that the rabbi will ask, in addition to the doctor. To what extent is this baby going to endanger the mother's life, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and in addition to assessing the danger of the situation, the rabbi will also take a look, how far does the pregnancy come along? And although abortion is generally forbidden, even before the fetus is considered viable, but it's depending on the state of pregnancy that for the rabbi, to actually share with what the Torah says about it. So I feel a rabbi has the role of a spiritual mentor, and the rabbi's role is to guide the woman on her journey with words of wisdom, words of warmth, to look into the oral law, look into the Torah. But at the end of the day, we're going to read in the Torah in a few weeks that God gives, it's one of the most beautiful things he gives us, bchira chafshit. He gives each one of us free choice. That's one of the most beautiful principles in Judaism. And what does God say? I'll place in front of you blessing, I'll place in front of you curse. And he says, ubacharta b'chayim, choose life, but God does not impose that upon us. So therefore, I personally feel a woman who's facing that difficult position of deciding if she should go through with an abortion or not, she should acquire all the appropriate knowledge. And then she and she alone is to make that decision on that matter. The rabbi's role is to give support, to inspire, to look into the Torah. Torah is a manual. We have a manual on everything. You buy anything you buy today, it comes today, you don't have printed manuals, a manual online. The manual for life is Torah. Torah means instruction. So the rabbi can share and guide and inspire. But this gift that God has given to us of choosing is something that each one of us is entitled to. And God says, I'm not going to make that decision for you. He leaves that up to us. So if a person comes to us, we share comfort, we share warmth, we share some guidance, but I'm not going to be sharing with them all the different teshuvot of what this rabbi says or that rabbi says. We'll listen to them, we'll guide them. But at the end of the day, I think that, as Rabbi Laurie says, no woman really wants an abortion. They just need to hear the right words. They're going to make their own decision. I mean, we're going to read this Shabbat and Shul with the prayer that we say every single day as a Jew, from the day from a baby's born until they pass away, of Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. That's tomorrow's reading, Shishi. That's tomorrow's next. And what do we do when we say that prayer, that there's one God? We cover our eyes. You ever wonder why that's the only prayer in Judaism you cover your eyes? You don't cover it by Amida, you don't cover it in the Elah, only by Shema. So I saw a beautiful thought that I was learning yesterday, and I thought it's a bit related to this. It's that when a husband and a wife have an argument, or two close friends have an argument, and they are stuck in their way that they are right, that they are so right that they can't hear the opinion of the other person, that argument's going to go nowhere, and their opinions are going to get stronger and stronger, and the argument's going to grow and fester, and it'll blow up. So what's the solution? Sometimes we need to stop for a moment and close our eyes and listen to the other person. You don't have to agree, but just listen. Put your own personal perspective aside and hear what the other person is saying, maybe between a husband or wife or anyone else. And then you can decide if you'll accept it or not. But if you're not listening, it's not going to work. It's the same in our relationship with God. What do we say? We say, God, you are one. Hear, O Israel, Lord's our God, the Lord is one. God has his vision for the world. We have ours. We all have material pursuits. We have all the things we want in the world, and everyone has a long list of what it is. But if it's just about my opinion and not God, it's like me focusing on how I feel. God has purpose why he created a world. Everyone is to make this world a godly place. Live your life the way you understand it. Take the Torah, but it's your choice. So the only way to hear God is sometimes closing your eyes. You close your eyes, and when you're closing your eyes, you're really closing it. You say Shema Yisrael. Change the word Yisrael to yourself. So if my name is Yitzchak, it's Shema Yitzchak. I'm that Jew. Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Put my personal needs and desires aside. What does God say? I don't necessarily have to agree. It's my choice. God says it's your choice. But I think if we have someone come to us and talk to us about they're facing an unwanted pregnancy or whatever is going on, it's listen to them, comfort them, give them words of warmth, but also share with them how maybe give them some, there's stories I read online. So we all know so many stories of people that were afraid to have that child. They thought they couldn't do it. Maybe how they're going to manage it emotionally or financially. Sometimes warm words from a rabbi can help a woman overcome it. It doesn't mean she shouldn't have it. If she needs it for whatever reason, all the reasons we spoke about before, it could be she should have it. But sometimes I think we as rabbis can help save those children. After all, hey, we're only 15 million, lost 6 million. Don't we want more Jewish babies in the world? So really, to summarize it, I think that us as rabbis, we're here to comfort, to give warmth, to guide, to teach them, and help them make the right decision. But again, they have the right to make that decision on their own. God says that in the Torah, ubacharta b'chayim. And hopefully, each one of us rabbis, when we come to those moments, we can share personal stories. Right, Laurie, your story is so powerful because it's your own story. But I've never been pregnant yet. I can't share such stories, but I hear stories from people. I think stories are very powerful. Again, people aren't going to come back to the text. They're going to come to us for guidance. And I think that's what we look to. We look to the Torah for guidance, and hopefully we can inspire to help people make the right decisions on their own.
I really do appreciate you sharing your journey and how you meet with families and giving them the space that they need, but also the comfort to make sure that they know that there is a community that supports them and a tradition that supports them and a God that supports them. But most importantly, I really appreciate the fact that you said we just sit and listen to one another, because that's what really the gift of this evening is, to be able to hear from the different perspectives, that we're listening to the voices of our generations before, but also how that impacts us and how we serve our communities, honoring all of those traditions and really reading into them through the lenses that we have, but also being able to do so with integrity and with a focus on making sure that it is still an important, that vital core of who we are as a Jewish community. I want to see, I know, Rabbi Jessica, you have a question, and if we could hang on 1 second, because I have an important question to ask about, going back to that issue of mental anguish or in what cases would maybe not a non-physical threat cause, if we're not talking about stoning a pregnant woman, or what today might fall into that category. And so, Rabbi Joshua, I know we have some questions in the chat that directly ask this specifically about rape, but will you talk a little bit about that, how that non-physical threat?
Yes, I think that from what we were discussing before, and especially during the text that we see from many different contemporary authorities, once you open up what is the narrow understanding of what is like a physical danger to the mother, to what could be almost anything, as Mishpetei Uziel will present, there are a lot of things that physically won't present any problem to the life of the mother, but they will create other challenges, mentally, spiritually, whatever. And I think that all of those things are somehow contemplated in Jewish law, which again, bringing everything that most of us have been saying all throughout, maybe, and this is certainly one of the things that I love the most about Judaism, is that it creates room for maneuvering in which different people may need a different answer, and Judaism is creating enough of a space. And this is not actually in terms of the different denominations. From the traditional conversation of the Elu Velu Divrei Elohim Chaim, is this idea that something that may work for one family may not work for a different family. I remember when I was, one of the questions that I was asked by the Beit Din, by the rabbinic tribunal, when I was about to become a rabbi said, if I was 24, very, very, very young, and one said, if a couple comes to you asking for an abortion, what are you gonna say? And my answer was, I will try to listen to them and then give my answer, which the rabbis liked. And so they said that it's very important, because at times you need to use Rashi, the commentator, and at times you need to use Roshi, like your head, it's like, and so Judaism most of the time doesn't give us the pre-packaged solution that is like, I like to call the happy meal Judaism, where you don't have to think. It's like, it's more complicated. You need to struggle. Cases are different. Families are different. And what I love the most is that there is enough room. Part of what creates many, many problems with the situation in the country right now is that, legally speaking, all that nuance, all those different options, all that room is completely erased. And when that happens, you are stuck in a very, very tricky place. and that is completely against what I mean the Jewish approach to law usually is.
Thank you. And yes, Jessica, get you. I think that your last words, Rabbi Joshua, really speak to some of the questions or the points that are raised at the most recent chat, which I know we'll get to as a community in the weeks ahead. Are really that because we're so nuanced, because we don't just have black and white, yes or no, that we take a case by case basis and really try to apply the law to a specific case, and we're not or nothing. That does allow for us to have an argument saying this is a matter of our religious freedom to be able to have this wrestling. And so that I think is being worked on as a community, because you hear from all of us that there's so much, there's room in there for those discussions. And so as we serve our Jewish community, I know that there are those who are working to make sure that that our practice is not stifled, that our traditions are not being circumvented in order to fall into a different rubric. From our perspective. So Rabbi Jessica, do you want to share?
Yeah, that was actually one of the things that I wanted to speak to Rabbi Mackler as both a recovering litigator and a rabbi, that I think for so many of us, so many of us as Jews, we look at what has happened and our immediate reaction is, this is a First Amendment or a 14th Amendment kind of issue. And I want to let people know that there are groups at a national level, Jewish groups, that are really working on this thoughtfully, groups that have known for a very long time that this decision in Dobbs was coming. And so one of the things that I've been on regular calls with a group called Rabbis for Repro. And one of the things that we are being counseled is to encourage people to take a deep breath and know that there are great minds that are thinking about this, and that this is going to be unfortunately, a long, slow journey forward. And that I think that what we're even finding in these few weeks, maybe a month and a little bit that have transpired since the Dobbs decision came out, is that even those who feel very stridently and strongly that life begins at conception or even at fertilization, which affects all kinds of situations and cases, that even they did not think about the ramifications of something like this and how it will actually impact real people. And I just, as we think about what's coming and what's going forward, what we're doing going forward, this was the question that I was thinking of, that I want to know from my colleagues, and maybe this will be part of what we've been, just since the power went out at West End, been thinking about, like maybe doing another in-person opportunity for us to talk as colleagues. One of the things I'm really curious about is, how are we going to work with people who are really desperately in need of an abortion and can't get one here in Tennessee? And how will we help people through those circumstances? And that's something that keeps coming up for me in terms of what people are asking me, or what organizations that I work with are counseling me to do with regard to, for example, a self-medicated abortion. So this will be, I think, a very long process for us. And I love the fact that as a community, this is an important issue to all of us. And just one last thing about abortion is, the point that was brought up several times about the need for this to be a part of the healthcare repertoire of any doctor that works in obstetrics and gynecology, is that we also need to destigmatize this word, and not perceive it as something that is, an offensive word.
Thank you. I know the work that you do, the work that many of us do in this realm is vitally important, and we will have the space as a community to delve further into what will be next. I know with the series that's coming, the next two series, they'll focus a little bit more on different avenues that we can address, because this is multifaceted and complicated. It's not a simple yes or no. One question that was posed right at the beginning from Todd Harmon spoke about, does science and science, innovation or technology or what we learn now, how has that changed or altered any of our the Jewish positions? Specifically, with fetal heart monitors, or being able to know a little bit more about the fetus in utero. How has that, if that has changed or impacted how Jewish law has responded? I know this was not a question that has been prepared, but does anyone want to share any, maybe off the top of their Roshi, off the top of their head, what they might, how they might have used scientific discovery in their understanding of the traditional texts?
Rabbi
Saul, mute.
I'll jump in while you're unmuting, Rabbi, just to say that I love this question because, regardless of how old our texts may be, how far back they date, at least my understanding of kind of our Jewish approach to studying Jewish text, which would be a Jewish approach, is that it's almost, there's a it's cliche to say timelessness to it, but what we pull and understand from our texts, the detail of the when and what was known then is almost secondary, not irrelevant, to the sort of the application at hand, or the lesson that's meant to be applied. I don't know if I'm explaining myself correctly, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are all sorts of revelations and new understandings that science and medicine have brought to us on a whole host of topics, that maybe once upon a time weren't understood, and yet our texts still seem to be able to speak down the generations to some of the same things that have been brought up, like the nuance and non-dogmatic sort of approach, the fact that it's a living tradition, that each situation involves, as Rabbi Kullock said, a different family and a different dynamic and a different set of circumstances. And so Todd, just to my response to your question would be that, yes, and I don't know that it necessarily changes a Jewish position, although there's certain things that have changed over time, right? Like the way the Jewish community responds to the issue of organ donation has definitely changed over time based on what we understand about science and medicine today versus, hundreds, thousands of years ago.
Right. Or what was considered life-threatening surgery, or even going under the knife at all versus people
Right.
to save a life. There's been made, what becomes a routine surgery is no longer the same kind of threat that it had been.
Yes, I think that's a perfect example. And so, so in some cases, yes, but I think that the text that Rabbi Shimberg culled for us and that we've referenced and offered in the source sheet tonight still have great value and a lot to offer, even if, they were written at a time and speak to a time that, was so different from ours as far as what we understand scientifically and with regards to medical innovation. But anyway, Rabbi Saul.
That was almost exactly what I was going to say. But if you want to see how technology impacts halacha, look at Rabbi Waldenberg. Think about the 60s and 70s, right? So he was the rabbinic authority of a big hospital in Jerusalem. And they were more progressive. And actually, in many ways, Israel is more progressive than America in all kinds of ways, but particularly when it comes to abortion.
Yeah.
And so Rabbi Waldenberg was the big posek of his generation in Israel that a lot of others followed, not all, but a lot followed, who was permissive for, well, the argument is about Down syndrome, but Tay-Sachs, and that was the debate between him and Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who said it was murder. I just want to give like a little insider scoop here. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, one of his prize students, basically said, I don't have anybody follow Moshe's opinion. I send them all to followers of Rabbi Waldenberg, which means that they both were very pronounced at the time, but it puts a lot of stress to say, well, what's the rule for everybody in America? That's what the Supreme Court, but Jewish law is like very personalized, very nuanced, very sophisticated. And it seems like Rabbi Waldenberg, through the technology of the time and what they're able to find out, allowed for more leniencies regarding abortion.
Thank you for bringing that up, Rabbi Yitchok. Just one second. I do want to mention about Israel. I know it's not in agreement across the board. There are challenges to Israel's stance on abortion. Even it's not completely permissible, just not surprising. There are some restrictions. However, I did want to mention that Israel, they have a public health ordinance that makes for every hospital to create a committee for the interruption of pregnancy. That's what the technical term is. Yeah. And on that committee, there must be a woman. There must also be a specialist in obstetrics or gynecology, another medical practitioner, and a social worker. And these are the people who meet with the family in order to decide whether the termination of pregnancy should exist, should go forward. And it's something like 98% of them are permitted. It was an overwhelming, almost all of them, but they go through the process of going, of dealing with this. This is a more medical than Jewish law, but it encompasses the way that we treat things on a personal basis. One interesting thing to note on top of that is after the case came down, the Dodge case came down here, Israel lessened some of their restrictions, even on this this commission, this committee that is at every hospital. So they've opened up because I think they see perhaps some movement toward visiting Israel for other reasons than to step foot on our ancient ancestral homeland. So I did want to put that out there. It is really an interesting case to watch. Thank you for that article. That Washington Post article is brilliant about it. Rabbi Tiechtel, do you have something you want to contribute?
I would like to add, I know we're all here talking about how every woman should have the right of abortion, but I also think as rabbis, if someone comes to us, a young woman who's physically healthy and she's emotionally okay, but she just doesn't want the baby because she doesn't want it. I think as rabbis, our task is to try to help the woman overcome the emotional fear, not right away to jump towards abortion. Not saying that she shouldn't do it, but I think that shouldn't be the first resort. And again, we're not talking about when the mother's life's in danger, etc. I read a fascinating story that was going around a while ago about an Israeli soldier who was in Hebron. He was shot by an Arab terrorist, and there was no one around to hear that he was shot, and he was bleeding and he was about to die. And the story goes that there was another soldier not far, and he saw his friend there, and he was able to quickly stop the bleeding and was able to get some help. And he was taken to a hospital in Be'er Sheva, where the soldier underwent surgery. And the soldier's name was Yoni. His parents found out about it, and they came to the hospital and they said, "Don't worry, your son was shot. He'll be okay." There's the one soldier there. His name was Yair. He saved your son's life, and it was a miracle that he was able to be there. And the soldier was saved. The parents wanted to thank Yair, but the soldier just left the hospital. And Yoni, they say in the story, he recuperated at home, and but there was never any closure because no one knew who the soldier was that saved his life. And the mom, Yoni's mom, went around. She put signs all over, and she just didn't give up. But then she had an idea. In the center of Israel is a city called Kiryat Malachi, not far from Ashkelon, and she put up a sign in the store describing what happened on that night. And she said, Israel's a small country, and hopefully we'll find out who that mystery soldier was. And finally, a while later, a woman customer saw the sign hanging in the store, And she remembered how happy her son Yair was one weekend when he came home. And he said, I heard a shot in Hebron in a back alley, and I saw a soldier there, and I saved his life. So this woman, went into the store, and she told the Yoni's mom what happened. And they wanted to verify the story. So they called Yoni, and they found out that, she actually found out who was the young man that saved her son's life. They had an emotional gathering, and they were talking about everything that happened. And they got up and they thanked him for saving the life. He said, you saved my world. And but the story wasn't over, because what happened was, a few minutes later, Yair's mother, the mother of the soldier who saved the other soldier's life, went over to the mother of the soldier, Yoni's mom, and said, look at me, you don't remember me? She goes, no, I never met you before. She said, you see, there's really a reason why I came into the store today, because I used to live here, and I was just passing by, and I wanted to give you some business, even though I was only buying a few things. So the mother, she says, 20 years ago, I used to live here, and I used to come buy bread and milk. And one day I came into the store, and you saw that I was a little down, and you said, why are you down? And I confided in you, and I told you I was going through a difficult time, and I'm pregnant, and I'm planning to have an abortion. So you called your husband over, and you didn't care about anything. You just cared about me, and you listened to me. And she says, I remember what you told me. You said, it's true, I'm going through a hard time, but sometimes good things in life come through difficulties. And the best thing comes through biggest difficulties. And you told me how you'll be so happy being a mother. And you said, wait till you hear that little boy say, Ima, and it's going to be the best joys of your life. And I was actually convinced, and I left. And she says, and you said, and she ended up saying, you see, God paid you back. She said, what do you mean? He said, that boy that I had 20 years ago, that you saved by telling me not to have an abortion, she said, my beloved son, Yair, would not have been born. And if he wouldn't have been born, he wouldn't have been there to save your life. So the life that you gave me, I gave back. So I saw this story. So we're going around for a while, but I thought us as rabbis should not always, if we can, in a certain circumstance, convince the woman who was about to have the abortion. If everyone is healthy and she doesn't want to carry it, I think it's a certain responsibility for us to try to save that baby. Again, we're not telling her what to do. She has the free choice. But I wouldn't say that that's the first thing, unless there are other medical, emotional, or all the other circumstances. I just want to share that, because otherwise I wouldn't want people, there's 90-something people on there thinking, okay, all the rabbis over here, we're pro-abortion. Yes, we should go ahead and let the woman do what she wants. Sure, she can. But I think life does come first when everyone's healthy. And if we can have some part in saving that baby, I think there's significant value to it.
Thank you, Rabbi Yitchok, for being able to frame that and to shift the perspective or our focus not only on a termination of pregnancy, but also on our obligation to also preserve life. And if there's a way of being able to negotiate both and help create families maybe in other ways, it should not be outside of our vision to be able to do that appropriately. Rabbi Rice, I know you had one other comment you wanted to share.
Well, I was just thinking about this maybe about 10 or 15 minutes ago, but it feels appropriate to share now. It made me kind of laugh to myself, but I don't know who was talking about resources. I think Rabbi Saul was at some point, and I was thinking about how for a very, very brief window of time, and we have 3 kids, thank God, and they're healthy, that I thought maybe we'll have a 4th. And it was like maybe a 6-month window. And I remember saying to my in-laws, we're thinking maybe like of having a 4th. And my mother-in-law said, it's hard for you to get apple juice to all of them already. She would have, of course, loved if we wanted to have another, but she was basically making this joke about like parenting is hard. It's a lot of work. It is, it's exhausting. And I can tell you right now, with a 20, 18, and 16-year-old, every day I ask myself, am I doing a good job? Am I raising good people? And so, I just want to contrast to Rabbi Tiechtel's very touching story that this is not a joke. Like parenting and bringing a child into the world. I laugh because we talk about like when a fetus is viable, and in Judaism, we talk about ensoulment being when they take their first breath. And I was watching one of these videos about like a baby giraffe that was just born at a zoo. And it said like it was born at 105, and then it stood by 140, and then it was nursing by 150. And I was like, I'm not sure my 20-year-old knows where the toilet paper is in our house. So all of this is just to say that parenting is not to be taken lightly. I'd love to have a dog. I'm not home all day. I don't feel like we could have a dog, that would be a kind thing to do. I think if a woman is doubting her ability to be a good parent, then I am in no position to do anything other than just support her in that moment and create safe space for her to feel that doubt. Because the minute you decide to be a parent, there's no escape card. There just isn't. You're in it, and people tell me, like, I'm going to be in this for a long time. Like, I think that they're about to be financially on their own. And it turns out, apparently, that's not the case. So I end with a little bit of levity because it's exhausting and it's the greatest job ever. But if you don't know for sure that you want to do it, I think that you can just doubt all day long, and I'm going to be here to support you.
Rabbi Laurie, I hear you. I want to tell you, I'm the oldest of 13. My mom has been a principal for 54 years. She's 75. She has 11 married children and maybe 60 or 70 grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Awesome.
And she's still an active principal. And you know what happens? It's not always easy. But being the oldest, I at times used to help with some of the younger kids. I'm not telling you anyone has to do it, but I think that every person in their circumstance in life, sometimes when a person is 17, okay, and that's a young lady who wants an abortion, sometimes needs to hear from someone more experienced, because they don't know enough to make, when you're really young, you don't know enough to make a decision. But I respect you, as I think that you have shared many valid points here tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I want to share that I respect each and every one of my colleagues, and I am grateful for the time you took, the pivot we took to all go online. For all of you who are here, I know there's a wrap up if Deb is going to come back on to say thank you for everything, but I wanted to take the opportunity as well. As you can see, this conversation can go on and on and on, and I hope it does. So please feel free to reach out to any of us for questions or comments, or to look at some of those texts together, because I know that would be a gift to us as well.
Yes, just in close, thank you to all of the rabbis who participated this evening. When we pivoted to virtual, we thought maybe an hour and a half would be too long, but I think what we've discovered is an hour and a half isn't enough. Basically, every participant stayed until the end. And so I definitely think there is room for future conversations, and it will be my absolute honor and pleasure to try to organize those for the rest of the community. As a reminder, the next in the series will be on September the 15th. It will be specifically to abortion as healthcare. And the panelists will include Dr. Nancy Lipsitz, Dr. Lisa Zucker-Wise, and Dr. Frank Bohm. And we hope many of you will be able, and hopefully maybe we'll be able to actually be in person for that. But I do feel like this was such a valuable and important conversation. We will try again to continue it in person. And thank you all for joining us this evening.
Deborah, there was one more request to drop the source sheet in the text one more time.
Yeah, what I will email the source. I will email that sheet. Everyone who is on this call registered, I will email it directly to everyone who is on the call, so that as people, we don't lose it. So everyone who registered will get it directly by email.
Violet Tove.
Thank you all.